Thank you so much for coming today. I am the director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and I just want to just remind you that before we move into the keynote presentation for this morning, we have turned the chat off and we have the Q&A open, and that's where you will be posting your questions, and we'll have it monitored, and we'll distribute those questions at the end of the presentation. I am very lucky to be able to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Flower Darby. Flower Darby is passionate about teaching and learning, and she supports best practices in teaching in all formats so that students feel included and are able to be successful. She loves to apply the learning sciences across the disciplines to promote effective teaching. As a faculty member and an instructional designer, she's worked in community colleges and universities for over 20 years and has taught both face-to-face and online in the range of subjects, including English, technology, leadership, dance, and fitness. She has also held leadership roles in faculty development and online learning. She's a columnist for the Chronicle of Higher Education, where you can find the well-read and very popular article, How to Be a Better Online Teacher, and Advice Guide. And of course, as we all know, she's the author with James Lang of Small Teaching Online, Applying Learning Science in Online Classes. This is a great book, and a book that provides actionable advice on online teaching. And I really personally loved the focus on universal design, creating accessible classrooms for better whole class learning, and the emphasis on why we do the things that we do. It's a very well-researched book, and it provides us with real examples, and you felt like you could implement the ideas and strategies in your course the next day. And it really does provide a blueprint for what you need to do in an online classroom. I'm confident that anyone who reads this book will find ways to improve their online teaching. So based on how great that book was, I'm also very excited to hear that Flower has a new book on the horizon on emotion science and teaching with technology called The Spark of Online Learning. So without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Flower. So please join me in welcoming Flower Darby to our TNL Day keynote presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for being here today. It really is an honor to be with you here. I really appreciated the comments that we've already heard about the toll that the current situation is taking on everybody's time, energy, and well-being. And I really value the fact that you made time to be here with us today. So thank you. And I'm actually just going to jump right in because I have so much to share with you today, and I don't want to run out of time. We have time at the end for your questions. And forgive me, I packed a little bit too much in because I just am so excited to be here with you, and I just want to share as many things as I can. So I'm just adjusting my screen. Here we go. I think you can see the slide. I actually want to start this morning with a question for you. And so I'm going to invite you, if you're taking notes, to jot down your answer, or you could just mentally answer this question. My question for you is, what is one word that describes the way that you feel about online teaching? Think about that word, make a note of it mentally or on your paper in Word, wherever you're taking notes. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the talk. Now, I want to tell you about something that happened in my Pilates class last summer. Pilates is a little bit like yoga, if you're familiar with that. And I was teaching a class at my local gym last summer. I was hurrying into the building and noticed that a woman was going in front of me with her rolled up yoga mat. And I thought, oh, good, somebody came to class, because it was a really beautiful day. And I thought, who's going to come on, work out inside with me? But she was going into the building. And as I turned the corner into the hallway where our studio is, I saw her standing outside the open door. And I thought, why doesn't she go in? And immediately I answered myself, it's because she didn't know if she was supposed to. I wasn't there yet, so although the door was open, the lights were off and there was no music playing, nobody else was in the room, and I could pick up on almost a tangible sense from her that she just didn't know if she was in the right place, was class even happening, and I just detected this really sort of very tangible frustration and confusion and isolation, like, what's going on? So in that moment, I said to her, are you here for class? And she said, yes. And I said, great, me too, come on in. Got the lights on, got the music playing, more people showed up, and we proceeded to have a good class. But it really got me thinking about what happens when our online students click into our classes. There's no one there to greet them, and we can't be necessarily, we can't be there 24/7, but there are things we can do to help them feel like the lights are on and the music is playing, that they are in the right place at the right time, and that we are glad that they are there. And so this idea of including and welcoming all of our learners, all of our diverse learners, and helping them all feel supported really has informed my work, and that's what I would like to share with you today. So just a quick roadmap of where we're going in this session. We are going to be talking just a little bit about the challenges of online teaching and learning, because they're there, and I don't want to gloss over those. We're going to take just a moment to remind ourselves of why this work is really important. And then I have so many very practical suggestions. Some of them are from the book. Some of them are from my later work, as certainly there's been a lot going on in recent months as we all try to learn how to do this better. So this is just kind of an idea where we're going. And I thought,
Howard,
yes.
Can you move your microphone closer to your mouth?
Oh my word, it was up there the whole time.
We could hear you, but it was a little bit quiet. Thank you so much.
So sorry, what a rookie mistake. My goodness. Thank you for jumping in, and sorry about that, everybody. That's okay, all of that other stuff was boring anyway. So here, now, hopefully we have better audio. Let's keep going. Thank you. Okay. So I think it's really important to recognize that there's a lot about online classes that we really don't know yet. And this is what I mean. We've been teaching and learning in physical classrooms for literally decades. By the time that we get into our classes, you know, when we're as educators, as faculty. But online classes, we don't really have that same kind of experience. Now, I do believe that this is changing. And in fact, I believe the pandemic has accelerated this quite a bit. But as it stands right now, neither we nor our students really have the same breadth of experience as we do with teaching and learning in a physical classroom. And so this picture here kind of reminds us that when we walk into a classroom, we know what to expect. We know where the desks are or the tables, we sit in them, we face front. You know, as students, we expect that there's going to be a whiteboard at the front of the room or a projector, a screen, a lectern. As faculty, we know that students should be sitting in their desks facing front and ready to engage in class. But I would argue that the same is not true for our online classes, that when we walk in there, sometimes we don't know what it should look like. We don't know where the desks are, the tables, we don't know where the front of the room is and what we should be doing there in order to have an engaging experience. So with time, practice, we're going to get there, but I think it's important to recognize that we have a lack of that kind of experience. There are some things that we do know. Sorry, I'm just having a tickle here in my nose. Okay, I thought it was going to be a sneeze, but I think the moment has passed. What we know about online students is that if all of our students looked as engaged and prepared and ready to learn as this guy, then I think we would all be fine in our online classes. But I don't know about you, some of my online students are not quite this prepared. There is robust research to show that students, in order to be successful in online classes, really need to be good managers of they need to be able to prioritize their tasks and organize themselves, motivate themselves, keep themselves on track, seek help when they need it, and then apply that help and monitor their approach and adjust it if needed. All kinds of really well-developed executive functioning skills help online students be successful in their classes. But again, many students don't have these skills yet, or they're still developing them. So I have a couple of ideas to share with you today that will help people develop some of these executive functioning skills to help them be successful. What we also know is that faculty find teaching challenging in these environments, and that will be no surprise to any of you here, I suppose. Is a small subset of faculty who, according to the research, really love to teach online. But for many people, we're still trying to find that joy. We're still trying to find what, how we can enjoy teaching and learning and get better at it. There's, again, very robust research. There's a lot of skepticism around whether online classes are effective, and that actually spans from faculty to students to parents to employers. But they can be, and I have lots of ideas here to share with you. We just know that faculty find this a challenging environment. But it really is an important thing to be involved in. I definitely, even before the pandemic, I was arguing that this is the way of the future. Online enrollments continue to grow, even while traditional, at least in the States, I'm not sure in Canada, but traditional college enrollments have been declining in the United States. And we know that online education makes it more available for more people to go to, and that's important. People who make the decision to go to college have a goal, and oftentimes that goal is about making their lives a better place and making the world a better place. More educated people are more tolerant, more diverse, or I should say open to diverse perspectives, more compassionate. Again, there's robust research to show that as well. So when we do this well, we help people achieve their goals, and that results in a better society for all of us. That's why I think this is really important work to do. But what we know about online classes too is that it's really helpful to foster the connections in the community. Right now, we're all very isolated. We're like that Pilates student outside in the hallway kind of going, I'm by myself here. This feels bad. I don't like this feeling. How do we create these kinds of connections and community in our online classes? How do we create this kind of an engaged teaching and learning experience online? Well, I have a couple of frameworks to share with you. And again, you may be familiar with these from the book or other sources, but if you haven't, let me just come across these, I was going to say. If you haven't come across these, let me just share with you a couple of guiding frameworks to really situate our comments today in. The first one is the Modified Community of Inquiry Framework. And this emerged from research in the late 1990s about what goes into a really good online class. The graphic in the center here, those three spheres, is the original Community of Inquiry Framework. The researchers wanted to know what makes a good class. And at the time, they called it computer-mediated instruction. I think that term is pretty apt because we are doing a lot of instructing computers these days, right? So here in this graphic, it represents the three presences that these researchers identified. The first one is the cognitive presence. And for me, these are like ingredients. What goes into a good class? Cognitive presence is the one that, in my opinion, is the easiest to make sense of. It's the thought work that needs to happen in an online class. It's the learning new information, understanding that information, remembering it, applying it, relating new concepts to previously learned information. The thought work, this also refers to your planning and your guidance and your teaching. It makes sense that there would need to be some thought work in a teaching and learning context. But the other two presences, I would argue, we're still trying to figure out, even though this framework has existed for 20 years and is really, really well tested and regarded in the online teaching world. The teaching presence and the social presence. We're still trying to learn, what does it look like to really teach online effectively? And what does it look like to welcome our student in the hallway outside the door and say, come on in, I'm glad you're here. When we teach in person, we interact with people at a very natural and organic level. And we need to find ways of doing that in online classes as well, so that all of our students, again, feel welcome, supported, and included. Now, in 2012, another couple of researchers came along and proposed the addition of a fourth presence, the emotional presence. And this, to me, has become so important that it now suffuses my thinking of everything that happens in online teaching and learning. That's why we show it here in this graphic as kind of surrounding everything. And the idea here is that emotions exist in our online classes, and we would do well to recognize that and to put them to work for us. So that word earlier in the presentation, when I asked you to think of a word that describes how you feel about online teaching, you're going to bring that emotion into your online classes. It's going to come with you. And similarly, students are going to bring their own emotions into online classes. So whether they're anxious about what to do, or how to be successful in that class, or whether they're dealing with challenging and heavy emotions just because of the current situation that we're in, globally with the pandemic and tensions that are escalating recently around racial disparities and concerns. All those emotions are going to come into our online classes. But the good news is that we have the opportunity to put emotions to work for us in order to help students be successful. And we're going to look at that in more depth in just a moment. But just this idea that there's these four kind of main ingredients that we need to be thinking about in our online classes. And that went the wrong way. Sorry, let's advance to the next slide and consider very briefly the idea of universal design for learning, because if you want to be inclusive in your teaching, this is a really great way to think about it. UDL, as it's called, comes out of the physical environment, the built environment. And so you think about a ramp that goes up next to a set of stairs, and that makes it easier for someone using a wheelchair to get to where they need to go. But what we also know from the physical environment is that lots of other people benefit from that, even though it wasn't put there for them. So, for example, somebody pushing a stroller, or maybe somebody using a walker with wheels, or somebody with a suitcase on wheels. All of these other people benefit from that ramp, even though they didn't necessarily need it or it wasn't put there for them. So UDL takes that concept and it applies this idea of supporting all of the people in our classes with on-ramps, with different ways of getting to where they need to go. So it kind of turns on its head the of needing to provide an accommodation for a student who might need, for example, captions for a video because of a hearing impairment. And instead of sort of making this an onerous task, it says, hey, let's provide those captions right on that, because they help all people. We know that a lot of people like to turn on the captions and read along as they're watching a video to help them absorb the information in a different way. So UDL is about providing options, it's about providing choices, it's about offering students different ways of showing their learning as well, so that, for example, some people process information verbally more effectively than they do in writing. So it might be the case that we could offer students the opportunity to turn in a recorded reflection instead of a written one, or a video presentation instead of a paper. And again, just the idea of giving people the choice is really where we're going with UDL. So with that, we're going to jump into a set of strategies that are so practical and so doable that you could apply them next week, or you might be thinking about these for your spring classes. But in order to be a small teaching online strategy, these things do need to be really small. They're 5-minute changes, interventions, or activities. They're strategic because we know that online teaching is time consuming, but there are ways that we can be more efficient and effective with our time when we make those minor modifications to the way that we communicate with students or other uses of our time. And of course, they have to be doable, because not doable, we won't do them. So with that, I have a few different categories of strategies to share with you today. And the first one, because it really does get me excited, is the science of emotion. Now, as Amy mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I'm working on a new book around this topic right now. I think it has so much potential, but my work is piggybacking off of the work of Sarah Rose Kavanaugh, who's pictured here on the screen. She is the author of The Spark of Learning, Energizing the College Classroom with the Science of Emotion, and I can highly recommend this book to you. It has really transformed my own teaching. And Kavanaugh argues that when we put emotions to work for us, we can help students focus, we can grab their attention, we can help them remember new information, stay motivated. And I don't know about you, but I believe that we could benefit from all of those advantages in our online classes and helping our students to benefit as well. So Kavanaugh argues that, contrary to popular belief, that emotions and cognition are actually intertwined. They're linked in a way. You can't think without your emotions being involved. And this goes contrary to popular belief. We like to think that, especially in academia, that the pursuit of knowledge is a cold, logical, and rational pursuit, but actually emotions are involved. And so they're very powerful, and we can put them to work for us to help students stay engaged and to help them learn maximally, effectively. So I have two suggestions to share with you about how we can put emotions to work in our online classes. And the first one is about creating the emotional climate in our classes. If you've been teaching online for any amount of time, I suspect you've observed this yourself, that some groups just have some classes have a different energy level, a different dynamic. And that is very that's very accurate, but the good news is we can actually influence the energy level in our online classes when we choose to bring our own passion, our deliberate enthusiasm and energy into our online teaching. So as an example, I think that many times we have been teaching our materials for a really long time, and we may have shifted into autopilot. I also think that right now we're all doing the best we can just to survive with so many demands on our time and energy, and it may be that we're not bringing our most energetic selves into our classes, and very understandable. But according to the emotion science, if we can remind ourselves of what fires us up about the classes that we're teaching and bring that deliberate intentional energy into our online classes, we really can elevate the energy and the mood, and students will respond by also getting more energized and feeding that back to us. So it's definitely a win-win. So how can you bring this kind of passion? Well, again, I would encourage you first of all to reflect on why you chose to make this a career. You love this so much that you decided to devote your life to this. So what is it that you find so interesting and relevant and important? And just put that at the front of the mind. But then we can also bring that passion into our online classes in lots of different ways. So for example, many online classes have a lot of writing in them. So whether it's an announcement or an email that you're sending to students or a discussion post that you're putting in your course, you can choose to infuse your writing with that enthusiasm, with that passion. When I first started teaching online, I found that I was writing those announcements to my students like a robot. Don't forget there is a quiz on Friday. But that's not the way I talk. Why was I writing that way to my students? We do have such a thing as tone of voice in our writing. Any English teacher will tell you that. And you can convey your own enthusiasm. You can convey lots of things through the words that you choose. So now my announcements sound something more like, hey everyone, you're doing really great work so far. Really appreciate all your effort. We do have a quiz on Friday. If you have any questions, remember I have office hours. Something like that. Remember, there's tutoring resources, and I just make an effort to write in a warmer and more supportive and enthusiastic way, because I'm choosing to convey my optimism and my confidence that students can be successful in my classes, and they absorb that based on a principle called emotional contagion, whereby we impact the emotions of others around us. Now, you've experienced that at, for example, a sporting event, or perhaps a movie theater after a new release, when there's a really exciting moment, when there's a crowd of people, emotions are sort of elevated because of the fact that we're around other people. We can do the same thing online and impact the emotional well-being of people. One other quick example of how you could bring the passion, and that is if you see something in the world that relates to what you're teaching, bring it in. If you find it interesting, if it sparks your curiosity, bring it into your online class. Share a link, a blog post, a YouTube video, a current event, whatever it might be, and that way you pass on your interest, your curiosity to your students as well, and engage them and say, hey, this really caught my attention. Look what's happening. Because we don't always think of it as such, but interest and curiosity are knowledge emotions, and they do help people stay engaged. So right now there's so much going on in the world. If you see something that is relevant, this is why it's important to know what we're teaching. Because of this situation here, look, that kind of energy can impact your students and help them. So one other idea for how we can put emotion science to work for us is very broad, because there's lots of ways to do this, and that is to design for emotion. The idea here is just to keep at the forefront of our mind that emotions really do people engage. And so what can we do to cause emotional connections or create emotional hooks into our material? Well, for example, it could be the way that you present course material. And again, this is an advantage of online classes. You can take advantage of media and videos and images and audio just by providing links and, again, using images to help. So for example, you might have a really well-developed, robust text analysis of a refugee crisis somewhere in the world, but the instant that you put a picture of that little toddler looking at the camera with the big eyes, maybe with a scuffed face, and you've got your students' attention like that. So it's, if you're a rhetorician, I'm talking about making an emotional appeal, and the reason is they work. And so we might as well put them in our online classes to enliven what can be an otherwise kind of dry or text-heavy space. There's other ways that you can provide, again, like media clips. I have a friend who teaches literature, and he needs an audio performance of the poems read by the poets, because that brings the text to life in a very, very different way. And students can pick up on the emotion, the meaning through that performance and understand, therefore, at a much deeper level. So things like that, providing media clips that illustrate or provide better understanding to your students, just the way that we present the information. But the other way that you can design for emotion is to think about the assignments that you give your students to do. Anytime that you can add relevance or connect a personal goal with the assignment, or tell a better story so that students are interested and invested in the experience. For example, maybe you have a case study and you could present it in a really sort of bland, boring way, but with just a little bit of detail about the people who are involved in this case study and the characters. You could even create personas, fictional characters who bring a story to life so that students are invested in the case study. There is robust research to show that that leads to more engagement and better, more durable understanding as a result. So again, look for ways to cause students to care about what they're doing. There's a well-known researcher in the field of affective science and education called Mary Helen Immordino Yang, and she argues only think about what we care about, which is a really interesting thing to chew on. Give your students something to care about in their classwork. One example, I have a friend who teaches pop culture, and she invites her students to engage on online discussion forums. She asks them to choose one superpower. What would it be and why? And then she takes that conversation, which students are naturally, again, interested in. It's fun, and enjoyment is an emotion. And then she forms that conversation into an analysis of character development and authorial motivations and good versus evil and all kinds of things based on what was a fun activity for students, something that they care about. So that's just, again, a very broad suggestion of many different things that you can do. We're going to move into now a second category of strategies that will help us keep our students more engaged for longer and help them finish our courses. Like it or not, there is evidence to show that the attrition rates in online courses they're higher. So how can we help our students persist and stay with us and complete the courses? Well, I have a couple of suggestions here to help students develop those skills, those executive functioning skills in our online classes. And, they're really good life skills too. So why not embed some activities that may not be specifically about the course content, but really does help them as a whole being, to be successful. So the first one is a goals contract. And if you've been teaching online for any amount of time, you may use something called a syllabus agreement or a syllabus quiz. This is a really good strategy whereby we ask students to agree to a set of statements that come out of the syllabus. Some of their own statements. I agree that I have to turn in my assignments on time, that if I have a question, I should go to the Q&A forum first, whatever it might be. There's a set of statements that students can agree to. However, I would argue that those suffer from the same challenge as every end user agreement everywhere, which is that it's really easy to go click, 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 I agree, and not really think meaningfully about what they want to accomplish in this online class. So the goals contract takes that syllabus agreement a step further with a second part. I like the idea of the agreement, and you can start with that, but then there's the second part that causes students to engage in creating a plan for their own success in your online class. The goals contract, very simple. I'm going to explain it to you verbally. What you do is you ask students to create 2 goals for their learning in your class. Ask them to identify one action that they're going to take that will help them to accomplish their goals for the class. Ask them to identify one challenge that could arise that would make it hard for them to be successful this semester or this term. And then, importantly, ask them to identify one strategy to overcome that challenge. So if I were a student in your class, I might say that my goals are to earn at least an 80% on every quiz and never miss an assignment, always make sure they're on time. My action is that I have set aside 5 different blocks of time throughout the week that I've dedicated for your classwork, and I'm going to protect those just as if I were going to class. Now, my challenge that could come up, it could be the case that my laptop goes on the fritz and has to spend a week in the repair shop. But my strategy is that my aunt who lives across town has said that I can come over and use her computer if I need to for my classwork. And so what this does is it gets students to take responsibility for their learning and their experience in your class. Now, who knows if that particular challenge is going to come up, but you have seeded the idea in your students' minds that inevitably something comes up that could throw them off, but it doesn't mean game over. They have agency. They can take responsibility, find a solution to overcome those challenges. So I like the way the goals contract sort of puts that in people's minds. And I would do this at the beginning of the semester, perhaps as you're thinking about your spring classes, just getting the idea into students' minds that they can take control. Now, this other one is a way to make sure that you're using your time as efficiently as possible. So what this means is that you reach out to students who really need a little bit of extra support to be successful. Many times online students really are motivated. They know that they have a goal, they get through their classwork, but there are some students who could use a little bit of extra help, and this is about reaching out to those students. So as an example, what you might do is look at your grade book after a quiz, for example, and identify the students who have earned, a little bit less than is really ideal, maybe a 69% low, and send an email to those students only and say, hey, I noticed you didn't do quite as well on this last quiz. What can I do to help? We have these tutoring resources. I have a review session coming up before the next quiz. I just want you to know that, there's ways for you to be successful. And again, research shows that students really respond well to that message from you, the instructor. And you're not necessarily sending that to the whole class. You're sending it to those students who need a little bit more help. You can be really efficient about this and paste the same message, the same body of the email into each email. Make sure that you address hi, Joe, and make sure you're using the right student name with that. Or, if you have a real class, you could just do like a BCC email, for example, to get this idea out to students that, hey, I see that you're not doing quite as well, but it's okay. We still have ways that we can overcome these challenges. So the idea of nudging selected students just to really help you focus your time and be a little bit more available to students who could use that. Now, I've been doing a lot of talking. We've had a lot of ideas. I would like to invite you just for a moment, just to think about what we've heard, make any notes. What are some key takeaways? Just a moment to process. And even though I think we could take a long time to process, we don't have a long time. So I'm going to jump back in. And just to let you know, we have 2 more categories of strategies to look at. One is about helping students make cognitive connections to help the material. And then I saved the best for last today. I know your theme is assessment, and so I have lots of ideas to share with you about fostering academic integrity in the assessments that you provide to your students in online classes. So that's what we're going to finish up with before we turn to your questions. First, looking at cognitive connections. Here on this slide is Michelle Miller. She's the author of a book called Minds Online, Teaching Effectively with Technology. And she has really helped me understand how long-term memory works. And as educators, we need our students to remember the information that they're learning and to be able to use it when they need it. And so I really like this closet analogy from Michelle Miller. She says that our long-term memory is like having a vast amount of closet space. We can store lots of information in there, but the challenge is getting that information back when we need it. So imagine that you have a really big walk-in closet, and maybe you do, but there are no organizing structures in your closet. There are no rods, no hangers, no drawers, no cubbies, no hooks, no shelves, nothing. All of your clothes and shoes and accessories are all in a big pile on the floor. How long would it take every morning to get the outfit put together that you want, to find the pieces that you want to make that outfit for that day? It would take a long time, and it would be really frustrating as you sifted through all that jumble of clothes and shoes to get what you wanted. Well, Michelle argues that that's what, and it's not just her claim, there's the neuroscience to show this, that's what our students' memories are like. Now, as experts in our subject matter, we have a well-organized closet system, but students who are novices do not have all those organizing structures. And so when they need to get the information back and use it to solve a problem or analyze a case or write a persuasive argument, when they need that information, it's really hard to get to because it's not well organized. And it's also the case that we can't go in there and install the closet structure for them. They need to create it themselves. So the next two strategies are about helping students form connections, organize new information so that they retain that information better and have an easier time getting back to it when they need it. The first one is to activate prior knowledge or experience. The research shows that when we ask people to think about what they already know about the topic, then it primes the pump and makes them more receptive and able to learn and retain new information. Now, we did this today. At the very beginning of the talk, I asked you to think about one word that describes the way you feel about online teaching. I had a pretty strong suspicion that everybody here today knows something about online teaching. And so when I asked you to think about what you already know by choosing that word to represent your experience, this is what I was doing. I was activating prior knowledge. And this is really easy to do in online classes in lots of different ways. One way that you could do this is you could create like a pre-check, a pre-assessment of knowledge and information at the beginning of a new module, for example. This could be an ungraded survey or a gatekeeper quiz that isn't worth points. It's just, hey, what do you remember about how to solve quadratic equations, for example? Or remember when you saw this concept in your high school time, what do you remember about this? So that could be like a pre-check. You could also do this in online discussion forums where you could ask students to write about what they already know. Or again, it could be a recorded response as well. What do you already know about this concept? Have you seen this in your workplace before? Or did you experience this at home? Whatever that concept or that phenomenon, that scientific principle might be, ask students to think about and sort of engage in a little mental activity there, an exercise to stretch their minds to what they already know about a topic will help them to learn and retain new information. And one last idea about creating the cognitive connections is to provide the framework. Now, this is such an easy, simple thing to do that when I say it, you're going to be like, oh, well, duh, but it's just a matter of taking the time to do this. And all this is to provide, for example, a guided notes document for your online class for every module. So the framework is about giving students a structure to put new information in. And so something like a skeletal notes document or a worksheet that students complete as they're working through the reading or videos or activity in your online class gives them that structure so they can put the new information into the spot where it goes. Now, I did this a little bit today with you, not a lot, but just giving you the roadmap at the beginning and a few verbal cues about where we were going next. Helps you to understand what's coming next. And you can do this again by providing like a worksheet that students complete. Maybe it's a reading guide as they're working through a textbook assignment, or maybe it's something more visual. I have friends who teach biology and they provide their online students with partial diagrams that students then have to annotate and fill in and label diagrams of biological processes, for example, at the cell level, and then students turn in their completed diagrams. Or it could be a concept map, it could be a table, a flow chart, anything that you can give students that is partially completed or just has the structure and they fill in as they're learning will help them to retain that new information. Now, you could make that worth points, or you could just encourage students to do it to benefit their own learning, but it's something to think about, just adding a little bit more structure for students to put new information into. But with that, I'm going to finish here with some ideas about creating assessments that foster academic integrity. Now, I know that this is a really big challenge in online classes. I've been doing a lot of work around this topic, as have many other people leading the conversations in teaching and learning right now. But there are some things that we can do, and they're not. That's my whole strategy. If something is really complicated, I don't think it's really effective. We need to do things that we can with our available time and resources. So again, some of these might be things that you will consider for your spring classes. Maybe there are some ideas here that you can apply right now. Let's jump right in. The first one is to get away from really big, really high stakes exams. So traditionally in a college class, it may be the case that students had a midterm and a final exam, and there wasn't a whole lot else for them to be able to to demonstrate their knowledge. Well, there's such a thing as a psychology of cheating. And what we know very clearly is when the stakes are really high, students are much more tempted to cheat on that exam. However, if the stakes are lower, it's too much work to cheat. And so this strategy really does take advantage of the psychology of cheating and provides a more supportive and inclusive approach for all of our students. It can be as simple as providing 14 weekly tests instead of 2 or 3 major exams. Those tests can still be rigorous, but the pressure is lower. If students bomb one of those 14 tests, all is not, they can still recover. But if they bomb a midterm and the only other exam in the class is a final, it's going to be really hard to recover from that. So just think about ways of breaking up those big exams, making them smaller, where it's too much trouble to cheat. It's actually not worth the time and energy. Just giving them opportunities, giving students opportunities to show what they know more frequently with less pressure will make a big difference. Another thing that you can think about doing is to include honor statements. There is research to show that this nudges students in the ethical direction of making the right choice. And so an honor statement might be something like at the beginning of your quiz, where you say to students, you know, don't ask other people for information. Now, you could also consider just making all of your quizzes open book and open note. I think in an online environment that is something to really think carefully about. So for example, the honor statement might say, this quiz is open book and open note, but you may not ask other people for help. So take this on your own, you know, but based on the knowledge that you have at hand. You could also end each quiz with an honor statement, asking students to affirm that they did this work by themselves. Now, will that work for all students? Maybe not, but it will nudge a lot of people in the right direction of making that ethical choice of not relying on other people's information. So think about whether honor statements might be helpful for you. Two other things that you can consider doing is to ask students to explain whatever it might be, their answer to the problem or the process. And so it's pretty easy to look up different problems and answers. There's new websites, chegg.com. Students are getting very creative in the way that they're finding and sharing answers. But what's harder to find is an explanation of what they did to get to that answer. So for example, you could have your multiple choice quiz, but then every so often you can have a short written response in your quiz that says, now tell me what steps you followed in order to solve that last problem. Where students have to explain the process, that helps hold them much more accountable. Or another way to think about this is asking students to explain why something works the way it does, or when we ask students to explain why something happens the way that it does, it really internalizes the learning for them and makes it, again, much more authentic. They have to use their own words to kind of explain why things happen. Last idea about assessments in online classes that foster academic integrity is to get to know your students and their voices in low stakes writing tasks. Now, this does depend on the size of your class, but if at all possible, you can learn students' voices and how they write through, for example, discussion forums or journal reflections or very low stakes written assignments every week. That helps you to detect pretty quickly if it has chosen to plagiarize on, for example, a paper, a major essay, for example, and then you can say, that's not the way the student normally writes, and it does kind of help you to be just more alert to if students are getting creative with the sources that they're borrowing from. So getting students to write more frequently in online classes, I think, is very beneficial. We know that a lot of people think better when they write, and it just will help you, if writing is of your course, to sort of pay attention to who these people are, how they write. And, you could be transparent about that as well and say, I know that, it's easy to find other sources, so we're doing a lot of our own writing. Another way is to frame your assignments such that they have to draw on personal experience, because that's going to be harder to find somebody else writing about each individual student's personal experience. So that was a lot of strategies that I shared with you here today. I apologize if it was kind of overwhelming. I hope it was useful, though. I land with one final question for you. I'm curious about your word about online teaching. I wonder if it has changed at all in the time that we have been here together. So think about that word, and now we're going to open it up for your questions. I'm thinking, Amy.
Thanks very much, Flower, for that, for highlighting some really pertinent topics in teaching and learning, especially in our current climate. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I think I can safely speak for many others. We have some very positive feedback, especially around your goals contract. I'll start with some questions. We may not get through all of them, so please bear with me, everyone, but I'll sift through and ask a few of the main overarching ones. So the first question is about bringing passion to create atmosphere. Jennifer Lewis says, one of the things that I hear from students is that they are getting too many emails and announcements. How do you find the balance of enthusiasm, showing your interest in the topic, and not overloading the students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, very timely now. Students are balancing and juggling formats that they really may not have chosen to. Before COVID-19, students were in online classes because they chose to take those classes. But now many students don't really feel prepared and equipped, and faculty, we're doing the best we can. I definitely think it's important to use your best judgment on finding that balance. I have been guilty in the past of spamming my own students with so many announcements and reminders that they stop reading them. And then that becomes a moot point, right, and useless. So I like to be strategic. For example, you could determine in advance, or even if you don't determine it in advance, you could tell your students, hey, we're going to try something new here. You can just change the plan in the middle if it's for their benefit. What I like to do is send an opening announcement on Monday and a wrap-up announcement on Friday, sometimes even Saturday or Sunday, depending on the format of the course. But just so that students have that predictability where they know that they're going to hear from me with a module overview, an introduction on Monday, and then at the end of the week, a wrap-up, a summary of the highlights. Here's some key themes that emerged from discussion, so that it's not a whole bunch of communication all the time. Now, sometimes you need to flex that if something comes up or you're detecting a lot of confusion about an assignment. You may need to change the flow or the pace a little bit, but I find that creating a schedule and even actually sharing that schedule with your students, tell them that on Mondays they'll get the opening announcement and on Friday or Saturday they'll get a wrap-up one. Help sort of declutter your communication with students.
Thank you so much for that. I also enjoyed that you brought in the community of inquiry framework, and we're wondering if you have any tips for how we might create community within our students and really encourage them to share their voice in an online space. Yeah, so that's a big question, but an important one.
I think there's a lot of things that we can do. We can promote ourselves and again, create the atmosphere that communicates that everybody is valued. We can do things, for example, in online discussion forums where we are intentional about responding to students using their names when we respond to them in a discussion. Really makes a big difference in them feeling seen and heard. Even, you know, and I'm not talking about Zoom teaching or cameras or no cameras. I'm talking about students in online classes. They still want to feel seen, even if it's in the discussion forum. There's some really great work being done by a researcher named Courtney Plotz that I have been referring to in some of my recent work, where she encourages creating a community values exercise, similar to, you know, something that you might do at the beginning of a course, where you students in creating a set of community values. What do we as a community think is really important? And you could seed this activity with things like we use person-first language, or we respect all perspectives, we don't silence anyone, we choose to engage in civil discourse if we do have differing opinions, we use evidence to support our claims. You could lead students activity like that discussion forum, or it could be, well, I think probably a discussion forum or something like Google Doc would be the easiest way to do that. And then, you know, you might sort of collate that, refine it, and share it with the class. Look, this is what we said we value. This is what's important. And then maybe circle back to it throughout the semester and say, how are we doing our list of values? Are we upholding things? Are there things we need to remind ourselves? So helping students feel welcome, that they do have that voice, that this is something that we agree as a community we need to engage in. Maybe those are some ideas to help.
Thanks very much for that. Our next question is about low stakes writing tasks. One of our colleagues says, I have heard from students that when they have many small things to do, they get overwhelmed with getting small things done. So if they have 14 small writing exams, how can we help support them? And this colleague is thinking about students who might have the same situation in 6 courses that they are taking.
Yeah, this is a question that has come a lot, really, in very recent days and weeks. I feel like everybody is tired, including students. And I feel like people like me who go and say best practice is to give your students a whole bunch of little things to do. Well, yeah, this is the downside of doing that. So here again, I guess an overall arching principle for me is that anytime you hear any of these recommendations, you know your own classes best and your material and your students. And so of course you have to apply a critical lens to everything that you hear and sort of say, would that work for me? Does that mesh with my teaching style? And there might be things that you choose not to apply, or things that you choose to revise or tweak in order to make it useful. In this particular case, I can see the value, you know, this is nuanced, right? It's complex. I can see the value of maybe choosing not to provide so many little things that students have to do. But the real value, the real important thing is to be thoughtful about that decision and to be intentional. And what I mean here is that many of us new to online teaching, we're just trying to kind of reacting because we don't really know what works. And so this idea of thinking through what can I give my students that would support them? Is it 3 deadlines every week, or is it that the majority of the work is due on 1 day per week? Now, if you do lean toward providing more things for students to do with more deadlines, I would highly recommend providing them a very clear schedule. I've recently become very fond of what I call course at a glance. And it is a table of assignments and due dates that is very easy to find on the landing page of the course when you first click into it, or somewhere very prominently posted like that, where students can even print the chart out if they want to and have sort of a checklist. So course at a glance, or a table like that that provides schedules and due dates and assignments, that can definitely help students manage if you do have multiple things due every week.
Thanks so much for that. Course at a glance sounds like such a useful way to bring the course together.
Right, right.
So this next question is about providing a framework for learning. With the view to encourage more learner agency, is this a task that we might bring students into and encourage them to contribute to in some way? And how might instructors go about doing this?
Great question. I was actually just listening to a podcast yesterday. I don't know if people here are familiar with the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast. I love it. It's wonderful. And yesterday's episode, it wasn't actually from a few weeks ago. Now I'm trying to remember what it was so that I can tell you. It was about, that's embarrassing, but I think it was about making online classes more inclusive. That's what we're all working on right now. And what this faculty member did is she created a space for students to kind of co-create study guides and share resources with each other. And this could be something as simple as a discussion forum that you put into your online class and say, okay, students, share your study guides. What are the things that you're making to help you? Or yes, certainly you could invite students to, let's just say at the end of a module, you could say, now let's make a study guide for that module or this guided notes document. And then you get the student voice in there and you could use that in future semesters, for example. So I don't know if that exacts the question, but the idea of getting students to help create some of those frameworks, I think has a lot of merit. And that way, again, that taps into the agency and the value and the relevance, all of those things that we know can help students stay more motivated and engaged.
Absolutely. And thanks for highlighting Teaching in Higher Ed. That's my go-to podcast as well. So really encourage everyone here to listen to that too. So our next question invites us to think about faculty well-being as well. So this colleague says, what would be your advice to faculty who are new to online teaching and are already feeling overwhelmed themselves, but don't want to bring that emotion into the classroom setting just yet?
That's a really important question. Can you hear me okay? Did my audio, it didn't change, did it?
Yes. Perfect.
I think we're still okay. Okay. Really important question. And I love a phrase that a colleague of mine came up with. It's called course design. No, it's called self-care. Anyway, the idea is course design as self-care. And this goes to the fact of understanding that we are also very, very overwhelmed, exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically, dealing with so many challenges and anxieties and fears and losses. So the idea is just keep it simple. Just do what you can. Now, that goes a little bit against some of what I was saying. For example, today I said, well, you could do this or you could do that. Keep in mind, I've been teaching online for 13 years. If you're really new to online teaching, you must keep it simple. Do what you can. Be transparent with your students. This is a really important season for transparency. And say, hey, this is new. We're just going to keep things pretty simple so that we can all manage and get through and be successful. Because everything does take more time in a pandemic. There was a great article that came out in April in the Chronicle by a researcher who works in crisis situations around the world. And she was like, we're in a crisis. You can't do all the things that you might normally do. So simplify. Don't feel that you have to use lots of technology bells and whistles or fancy approaches. The real key thing to do is to be available for your students and to be responsive to them. So if they send you an email, you reply in a timely manner as much as you can. And that kind of human connection and that kind of availability and support is much more important than all the complex course design structures or activities that you could create.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that important reminder. So this is one of our favorite questions. We do see this a lot, and I'll pass it on to you. Do you have any advice on how to manage group projects in an online teaching environment?
I have a terrible answer for you, and that is, do you really need them? That goes against what many people might suggest, and maybe if you do conclude you do really need them, then I'll answer the question in a minute. But first, I would encourage you to think, what is the purpose of the group project? Are you doing it just because you always do group projects, or is there real value and pedagogical goals to creating that group project? And I'm relying here on a book about high impact practices in online teaching. And the authors of that book make the useful argument that group projects are designed for, this is not exactly true, but one of the things that group projects can do is to help young people develop some of the teamwork skills that are really important in the workforce. Employers want people with good teamwork and collaboration skills, but many people who choose to take online classes are not young people. They already have been working in the workplace for quite some time and already have some collaboration skills, and it's really not a necessary thing for them to continue developing that. So just a thought that sometimes group projects and classes may not actually be the best match. But if you do, I'm sure that other people have encouraged us to do things like assign roles in groups and to have something like a team charter or a group contract, something like that, where we all agree. I think it's really important to have incremental deadlines on tasks, to have an accountability structure. I personally like the idea of having each person in the group provide a weekly, very short 3 to 4 sentence reflection on how the group is going. Certainly in that team contract, you might want to have the group think about what happens if somebody is not engaging. Lots of common strategy, but the other thing that I have done a lot in my own teaching recently is to move away from a group project that is pressured, you know, a high stakes or something where somebody else's performance impacts my grade as a student. And instead I have done more that just focuses on collaboration and peer-to-peer learning in discussion forums, in informal groups that don't have a really high stakes activity. I now use something that I call study buddies, where I connect students with 1 or 2 other students who, that's their little group for the whole entire class. Just reach out to one of these people first if you have a question or you're not sure. This is your group. And then again, you can structure that to require everybody. It depends on if, you know, your grading philosophy. If you really want somebody to do something in an online class, oftentimes it needs to be worth points. And so if you want the study buddies to be more structured, have students turn in a weekly reflection on what they did with their buddies that week and how it helped them to be successful. Just a few thoughts about peer-to-peer learning and the value, or maybe not, of group work in online classes.
Thank you for that. And thank you for starting with the question, is it really necessary? We have lots of faculty and their comments coming in as well, where they're weighing in on whether it is and whether it isn't. So thanks for making us think this morning. I'll ask maybe a couple more questions, if that's okay. We do have some time. This next question is about asynchronous discussion and online discussion boards. So this can sometimes get quite messy to follow, and it can be quite difficult to motivate students to interact in this sort of format. How might instructors design well-planned asynchronous discussion board activities online?
Great question, and one of my favorite topics. I could go on and on for hours, but I know we don't have that, so I'll limit myself. I firmly believe that asynchronous online discussions can be really good. And in fact, for me, that's where I actually find my joy of online teaching. It's interacting with people, it's guiding their learning and facilitating it. But it's not all on the instructor. The students do need to engage there. So first of all, I try to embrace the messiness. It's true, they're not well organized, and I would say software developers have a lot that they could be doing to make that a better environment. But given what we have right now, you could consider making smaller discussion groups. So if you have a large class, you could create small groups where people are doing discussions in, you know, so it's not quite so noisy on the discussion forum. But for me, it is about providing interesting questions that are naturally engaging, and maybe even multiple questions every week. So again, I know lots of faculty who post questions that are so black and white, there's nothing actually to discuss. So create things that are thought-provoking, that are controversial, that are, you know, that allow people to take different stances on that question. Or again, you could create questions. Oftentimes I have anywhere between 3 to 5 questions per discussion forum, and I say, pick the one that you're most interested in writing about, because that way you give students the choice, and when we're naturally interested in an activity or a task, we will engage more naturally in it. And then my last suggestion in limited time is to be in there yourself. There is a school of thought that faculty should not be in online discussion forums, and I don't agree at all. Be in there with your students, guiding them, asking leading questions. What else? Who else has a thought about that? One of my favorite strategies is to say, what do the rest of you think? What do others of you think? To invite other people to join in that conversation as well. So just a few thoughts on online discussion forums. I think they're great.
Absolutely, they can be very useful. So this next one, how can we best reach students whose technology situation might not be optimal? For example, they might not have ready access to broadband internet, high-speed computers, or they might be sharing among family members.
Yes, that's really good question and very timely and relevant. Actually, for me, it comes back to simplicity and using the asynchronous environment and the tools there. So in your asynchronous learning management systems, all those tools are accessible in terms of sort of people who need assistive technologies. But then also those activities can be done, for the most part, because they're asynchronous, they can be done at any time of day or night. So if students are sharing technology with other people that they're living with, then they can not feel like they have to be online with a camera and with high-speed internet at a particular day and time, because the activities are more asynchronous. So doing lower tech, simpler things in the learning management system and doing less of the Zoom teaching or the things that require more of that high bandwidth, that actually provides a more equitable and inclusive experience for all students.
Thank you very much. And my last and final question for you is just to ask you about your top 3 resources that you would share with faculty that they can go and look at if they want to extend their learning in this area. I know you mentioned the podcast and a few books. What would be your top 3?
Yeah, so facultyfocus.com is one of my very favorites. If you haven't come across that website, Faculty Focus is filled with super practical, super amazing, examples and approaches. What I was stumbling awkwardly over a moment ago was just to say that I'm writing a series myself on the Chronicle about online teaching. And so if you haven't come across that series, it's just more of what I've been talking about right now. So you can go to the Chronicle of Higher Ed and put my name in the search box and you'll find my online teaching series there. Apologies for tooting my own horn. It's just there's not a lot of people doing this right now. And we all need to know. And then, where my other favorite resource right now is Twitter. Really strong, thriving community on Twitter of experts in teaching and learning who really care and who are working hard. And so there's a lot of great people to follow on Twitter, and you can pick up on good strategies or ask your own questions there. So that might be my top 3.
Thanks very much, Flower. I'm just sifting through the questions to see if we might have time for another, but just give me a moment.
And in the meantime, I see in the chat box now that there was some request to move the microphone. I'm sorry I didn't see that. I'm glad that I'm not sure who it was in, but thank you for doing that.
Thank you. So we do have faculty curious about who they might want to follow on Twitter.
Yeah, of course. It's a good question. So Jim Lang is on there, Lang on Course, at Lang on Course. He's doing good work, of course. There's Joshua Eiler, Michelle Miller, Sarah Rose Kavanaugh. If you follow me, then you'll get connected with a whole bunch of people who are talking and thinking about these things. Thomas J. Tobin is doing really good work in this space. Courtney Plotz, the researcher that I mentioned earlier, it's Plotts. Just a few people to start with.
Thank you. I think my takeaway from that would be to follow Flower Darby and then to look at her contact as well. Thank you so much for your time. I will pass it over to Karen Spears for her final words.
Thank you, Arushi. Flower, that was so inspiring. And as an online former teacher, but also now instructional designer, I manage the Teaching and Learning Center along with under Amy and with my Teaching and Learning Center colleagues. We work with many, many faculty in helping guide them in developing their online courses. I loved so much of what you said resonated with me and the work that I've done over the last several years, especially about creating community with your students and finding ways to engage them and making that classroom online space feel welcoming. It's no different than when they walk into a physical space. They should be, joining a virtual space that is equally as welcoming, well laid out with all of the instructions and information that they would need in order to find the materials, get started, but also connecting with students. I encourage faculty, let
let your students get to know you. And don't be so, stiff and formal online. And I love the way you talk. I love the way you talked about, having that sort of informal communication with your students in an ongoing manner throughout the semester.
Yes.
So thank you so much for everything that you imparted to us today. I know that our faculty, myself included, will take many, many lessons away and integrate them into our teaching practice. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate the time together.